Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The Countdown. The first time I saw him, I thought it was a dream. It was a humid summer night, and I had left the window open to let in the breeze. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across my room, making everything look distorted and menacing. I woke up with a start, feeling a cold sweat trickling down my back. That's when I saw him. A man standing at the foot of my bed, grinning from ear to ear. His teeth were unnaturally white, gleaming in the moonlight. His eyes were dark, hollow pits that seemed to suck in all the light around them. I blinked, hoping he would disappear, but he didn't. Instead, he started counting down. 10, he said, his voice a raspy whisper that sent chills down my spine. I was frozen in place, unable to move or even scream. 9, he continued, his grin widening. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It had to be a dream, I told myself. But it felt too real, too vivid. As he counted down, I could feel a growing sense of dread. 8. I wanted to shout, to call for help, but no sound came out. 7. My body was paralyzed, held captive by some unseen force. 6. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. 5. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, he would be gone. 4. I dared to peek, hoping against hope, but he was still there, his grin never faltering. 3. I could barely breathe, the terror gripping me like a vice. 2. My vision started to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges. 1. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest, as if a cold hand had reached in and squeezed my heart. Then everything went black. I woke up the next morning, gasping for air. The man was gone, but the memory of his grin and his countdown lingered. I tried to brush it off as a nightmare, a trick of my mind. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. The terror I had felt was too real, too visceral. I couldn't shake the feeling that he would come back. Days turned into weeks, and I did my best to forget about the grinning man. But every night, as I lay in bed, I would glance toward the foot of my bed, half expecting to see him standing there. Sleep became elusive, and I grew paranoid, jumping at every little sound. My friends noticed the change in me, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I had seen. They would think I was crazy. One night, I decided to take sleeping pills, desperate for a good night's rest. I downed the pills with a glass of water and crawled into bed, praying for dreamless sleep. But as I drifted off, I heard a familiar whisper. 10. My eyes snapped open, and there he was, grinning at me. 9. Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. My heart thudded violently against my ribcage as I scrambled to the edge of the bed, attempting to escape the grinning man's countdown. 8, he continued, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to echo through my very bones. My limbs felt like lead, every movement a monumental effort. The room seemed darker, the shadows deeper and more sinister. The oppressive weight of fear pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I mustered all the strength I had and bolted upright, fumbling for the light switch beside my bed. 7, he intoned, his grin never wavering. The light flickered on, casting the room in a harsh, artificial glow. But he was still there, standing at the foot of my bed, his eyes boring into mine. I screamed, finally finding my voice, but the sound was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. I stumbled out of bed and backed away, my eyes never leaving the grinning man. 6, he said, taking a slow step forward. My back hit the wall, and I felt a cold, creeping terror wash over me. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. My fingers were trembling so badly that I could barely dial the number. 5. As the phone rang, I kept my eyes on the man, praying for someone to pick up. Hello, came the groggy voice of my best friend, Jake. Jake, help me. I cried, my voice a high-pitched, frantic whisper. There's someone in my room. 4, the man continued, his grin widening. What? What are you talking about? Jake asked, sounding more awake and concerned. "There's a man in my room, and he's counting down," I said, my voice breaking. "He's going to kill me, Jake." 3. The air seemed to grow colder, and I could see my breath in the dim light. "Stay on the phone," Jake said urgently. "I'm coming over right now. Just stay on the phone with me, okay?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, my eyes locked on the man. 2. I heard Jake's car start in the background, the sound a distant lifeline. "He's almost here," I whispered to myself, trying to stay calm. 1. The man's grin seemed to stretch impossibly wide, and his eyes glinted with a malevolent light. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my chest again, and I doubled over, gasping for breath. Everything went black once more. I woke up to the sound of Jake pounding on my door. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet, feeling weak and disoriented. I staggered to the door and flung it open, collapsing into Jake's arms. "He's here, Jake," I sobbed. "He's going to kill me." Jake looked around the room, his expression one of confusion and concern. "There's no one here, man," he said gently, leading me back to the bed. It must have been a nightmare. I shook my head vehemently. No, it was real. He's real. And he'll come back. Jake stayed with me that night, and I managed to get some restless sleep. But the memory of the grinning man and his countdown haunted my dreams, and I knew that my ordeal was far from over. Every night, I dreaded the moment I would wake up to find him standing at the foot of my bed once more. And deep down, I feared the day he would reach one again. Jake insisted on staying with me for a few more nights. Though his presence was comforting, the grinning man's image lingered in my mind, unshakable. Each night, I found myself waking up at the same time, my eyes darting to the foot of my bed, expecting to see those dark, hollow eyes and that sinister grin. But for 3 nights, the man didn't appear, and I began to hope that maybe he was gone for good. On the 4th night, Jake decided to head home. "You need to try and get back to normal," he said, his eyes filled with concern. "Call me if anything happens, okay?" I nodded, feeling a pang of fear but knowing he was right. I couldn't let this terror control my life. As he left, I locked the door behind him and took a deep breath, trying to muster the courage to face the night alone. I went to bed early, hoping that exhaustion would pull me into a deep sleep. But as the hours ticked by, I found myself wide awake, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind outside sent shivers down my spine. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was safe. But deep down, I knew he was coming back. Around midnight, the room grew colder. I pulled the blankets tighter around me, my breath fogging the air. A sense of dread settled over me, heavy and suffocating. And then, I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper. 10. My heart stopped. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it was a nightmare. 9. The whisper was closer now, more insistent. I forced myself to open my eyes, and there he was, standing at the foot of my bed, his grin as wide and menacing as ever. 8. I tried to move, to scream, but my body refused to obey. 7. His voice was a low, raspy whisper, each word dripping with malice. 6. I could feel the terror rising, threatening to engulf me. 5. Desperation surged through me. I couldn't let him reach one again. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I threw myself out of bed and ran for the door. But as I reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. 4. I turned to face him, backing away until I hit the wall. 3. His eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. 2. I was trapped, helpless. The air grew colder, and I could see dark shapes moving in the corners of the room, silent watchers waiting for the countdown to end. 1. The grinning man took a step closer, and I felt a searing pain in my chest, more intense than before. Darkness started to close in, and I struggled to stay conscious. Just as I was about to succumb to the darkness, a loud crash echoed through the room. The door flew open, and there stood Jake, his face pale and terrified. "Get away from him," he shouted, charging at the grinning man. The moment Jake's hand touched the figure, it dissipated into a cloud of dark smoke, the room growing instantly warmer. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Jake knelt beside me, his eyes wide with fear and concern. "Are you okay? What the hell was that?" I shook my head, unable to speak. The grinning man was gone, but I knew he wasn't defeated. He would be back. And next time, I might not be so lucky. The days following Jake's intervention were a blur of fear and confusion. We spoke in hushed tones about the encounter, each of us trying to make sense of what had happened. I knew deep down that the grinning man was not just a figment of my imagination. He was real, and he would return. Jake believed me now, but neither of us knew how to stop him. We decided to research similar cases, hoping to find some clue, some way to protect me. We scoured the internet, old books, and even visited local folklore experts. We came across stories of shadowy figures, malevolent spirits, and ancient curses, but nothing quite matched the grinning man and his countdown. Desperation gnawed at me, the sense of impending doom growing stronger with each passing day. One night, Jake suggested something radical. "Maybe we need to confront him," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "If he's counting down, maybe there's a way to stop him before he reaches zero." The idea terrified me, but I knew we were running out of options. The thought of waiting helplessly for the grinning man to return was unbearable. We prepared ourselves, gathering what little information and protective charms we could find. That night, we stayed up, waiting for him. As the clock struck midnight, the room grew cold once more. A heavy, oppressive silence fell, and I knew he was here. I clutched a talisman in one hand and a flashlight in the other, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake stood beside me, his face pale but determined. 10, the grinning man whispered, appearing at the foot of the bed. His smile was more sinister than ever, his eyes two black voids. And 9, I stammered, trying to remember our plan. Jake and I had decided to confront him together, hoping to break his hold over me. "What do you want?" Jake demanded, his voice shaking but firm. The grinning man ignored him, continuing his countdown. 8. We took a step forward, standing side by side. "Leave him alone," Jake shouted. "We won't let you take him." The air grew colder, and the dark shapes in the corners seemed to draw closer. 7, the man intoned, his grin never faltering. Desperation clawed at me. We needed to do something, anything. I remembered an old ritual we had found, a way to banish spirits. It was a long shot, but it was all we had. "Jake, start the chant," I whispered. Jake nodded and began reciting the words, his voice trembling but clear. "Spirits of the night, we banish thee." 6, the grinning man interrupted, his voice dripping with malice. The room grew darker, the shadows pressing in around us. 5. I joined in the chant, our voices blending together. "Return to the void, from whence you came." 4. The pain in my chest intensified, and I struggled to keep chanting. 3. The grinning man took a step closer, his eyes locking onto mine. 2. The darkness was overwhelming, suffocating. 1. His voice was a whisper, a promise of death. The pain was unbearable, and I felt myself slipping away. But then, a sudden warmth enveloped me. The talisman in my hand glowed brightly, and the grinning man recoiled, his grin faltering. "Now, Jake!" I shouted. We chanted the final words together, our voices rising in unison. "Begone, spirit of darkness. Return to the shadows." The grinning man screamed, a sound that pierced the air and sent shivers down my spine. His form began to dissolve, the darkness retreating. With a final, furious glare, he vanished, the room growing warm and bright once more. I collapsed, exhausted but alive. Jake rushed to my side, his face a mix of relief and fear. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice shaking. I nodded, feeling the weight lifting from my chest. "I think so," I whispered. For now. But deep down, I knew that the grinning man was not gone forever. He was out there, waiting. And one day, he would return. But next time, we would be ready. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. Whispering Shadows. When I moved into the old Victorian house on the outskirts of town, I was looking for a fresh start. The paint was peeling, the floorboards creaked with every step, and the windows had long since forgotten how to shine. It was perfect. It was the kind of place where a person could lose themselves, and that's exactly what I intended to do. My brother's death had left a gaping hole in my life, a wound that refused to heal. People kept telling me that time would make it better, but they didn't understand. They couldn't. Ben and I had been inseparable. Losing him was like losing a part of myself. That's why, when I first heard the whispers, I didn't think much of it. Grief can play tricks on the mind. The first night in the house, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. It was then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. "Ben," it said, as if the house itself was speaking to me. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, but there was only silence. The whispers grew more frequent over the next few days. At first, they were just vague murmurs, but soon they became clearer, more distinct. It was always Ben's name, spoken in a voice that was eerily familiar yet impossible to place. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the house settling, or the wind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of Ben's things, the whispers grew louder. "Ben," the voice said again, but this time it added something more. "Secrets." I froze, my hands trembling. How could this be happening? Ben's secrets were buried with him. No one else knew. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I began researching the house's history. It turned out that the house had once belonged to a family that had experienced a series of tragic events. The father had gone mad, driven by the whispers that filled the house, and had taken his own life. The rest of the family fled, leaving the house abandoned for decades. It was said to be haunted, but I hadn't believed in such things, until now. One night, as I was sitting in the living room, the whispers began again. This time, they were more insistent, more urgent. "Ben," the voice called, and then, "secrets, hidden, truth." I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest, to the hallway outside my bedroom. There, standing in the dim light, was a shadowy figure. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall and thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but the whispers grew louder, more desperate. "Ben's secrets," it said, and then, "find them." I knew then that I couldn't ignore the whispers any longer. Whatever was haunting this house knew something about my brother, something I needed to uncover. I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. As I stood there, staring into the hollow eyes of the ghostly figure, I made a promise to myself. I would uncover Ben's secrets, and I would put an end to the whispers once and for all. Determined to uncover the truth behind the whispers, I started delving into the house's history. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo with the past, each gust of wind through the broken windows whispered secrets long buried. Armed with old documents and faded photographs, I began to piece together the story of the house and its former inhabitants. The diary I found in the attic was my first real clue. Its pages, yellowed with age, were filled with the ramblings of Margaret Evans, the wife of the man who had gone mad. Her handwriting was frantic, her words a desperate plea for help. "The shadows speak," she wrote. "They tell me things only I can hear. They say my husband is not to blame. They say the house is cursed." My fingers trembled as I read, the weight of her words pressing down on me. The more I read, the more I realized that the whispers were not just in my head, they were a part of this house's dark legacy. As days turned into nights, the whispers grew more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. Secrets. Ben. Find the truth. I felt like I was being pulled into a vortex of the past, the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurring. The air in the hallway was colder now, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected to see Ben standing there, his eyes filled with the same fear that gripped me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to explore the cellar. The old door creaked open, and the musty smell of damp earth and decay hit me like a wall. The narrow stairs led me down into darkness, and the only light was from the flickering flashlight in my hand. As I reached the bottom, the whispers became louder, more urgent. "The truth is here," they hissed. My heart pounded in my chest, and I stepped forward, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. In the far corner of the cellar, I found an old chest, its lock rusted and corroded. With a surge of adrenaline, I pried it open. Inside, amidst a jumble of old clothes and forgotten relics, was a small, ornate box. I lifted the lid, and the contents sent a chill down my spine, a collection of old letters and a photograph of my brother Ben, smiling with a group of people I didn't recognize. The letters were dated just before Ben's death, written by a woman named Emily, who spoke of strange occurrences, unsettling dreams, and a growing sense of dread. "He knows something," one letter read, "something that should stay buried." As I read the letters, the room seemed to close in on me. The shadows danced around the cellar, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices. Ben, secrets, the truth. It was then that I noticed the photograph in my hand. It was different. The eyes of the people in the photograph were not just staring at the camera, they were looking at me, their expressions filled with sorrow and fear. Among them, Ben stood, his eyes wide with terror, and I realized with a jolt that the truth I was seeking was not just in the past, but right here, in this house, in these shadows. The final letter was a scream in ink, a frantic plea for help from Emily to Ben. "The shadows are coming for you," she wrote. "They know your secrets, and they will not rest until they are free." My hands shook as I read the last words. Ben had known something terrible, something he had tried to bury deep within himself. The house, the whispers, they were all part of a greater puzzle, one that I was now a part of. Suddenly, the cellar door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. The whispers turned into a roar, and the shadows seemed to reach out, grasping at my feet. I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight, watching, waiting. As I turned, I saw it, a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It wasn't just a part of the house, it was the house itself, a living, breathing entity that thrived on fear and secrets. The figure in the cellar moved closer, its form shifting and flickering like a candle flame caught in a breeze. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a cold hand brush against my cheek. "Ben's secrets," the voice said, clearer now than ever before. "You must know." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I forced myself to stand my ground. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling but defiant. The figure paused, as if considering my question, and then spoke again, this time in a voice that was eerily familiar. It was Ben's voice. "Look in the attic," it whispered. "Find the box." And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness of the cellar. My legs felt like jelly, but I managed to climb the stairs and make my way back to the main part of the house, my mind racing with questions and fear. The attic. It had to be the final piece of the puzzle. I climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing in the stillness of the house. The attic door groaned open, and the smell of dust and decay filled my nostrils. The dim light from my flashlight revealed a cluttered space filled with old furniture, broken toys, and forgotten memories. I began to search, pushing aside boxes and cobwebs, until I found it, a small, unassuming wooden box tucked away in a corner. With trembling hands, I opened the box and found a collection of old cassette tapes. The labels were faded, but one stood out, Ben's Secrets. My heart pounded as I placed the tape in an old player I found nearby and pressed play. The tape crackled to life, and Ben's voice filled the room. "To whoever finds this," he began, his voice strained and fearful, "I need you to understand what happened to me, what I discovered." He spoke of a group of people who had lived in the house long before the Evans family, a secret society obsessed with the supernatural. They had performed dark rituals, attempting to communicate with the dead and unlock the mysteries of the afterlife. Their leader, a man named Victor, had become consumed by his quest for power, and in his madness, he had bound the spirits of the dead to the house, creating a prison for their tormented souls. "I found their records," Ben continued, his voice trembling. "I found the evidence of what they did." But before I could reveal the truth, the whispers started. They knew I was close. They wouldn't let me leave. They wouldn't let me live. The tape ended with a chilling silence, and I realized with a jolt that Ben's death had not been an accident. He had been silenced by the very spirits he sought to expose. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The whispers, the shadows, they were all part of a dark legacy, a curse that had claimed my brother and now sought to claim me. I knew I had to do something, to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. But how? How could I fight something that wasn't even alive? As I stood there, lost in thought, the attic door slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, and the shadows began to move, coalescing into the form of the figure I had seen in the cellar. It reached out, its hand icy cold as it grasped my wrist. "You must finish what Ben started," it said, its voice a chorus of anguished souls. "You must set us free." Fear clawed at my heart, but I knew there was no turning back. I had to find a way to break the curse, to free the spirits trapped in this house and avenge my brother's death. As the figure faded into the shadows once more, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I would uncover the final secrets, I would confront the darkness, and I would put an end to the whispers that haunted this house. Determined to end the curse and free the trapped souls, I returned to the cellar, clutching the box of tapes and the diary of Margaret Evans. The cellar door loomed before me, an ominous reminder of the secrets it held. I took a deep breath, pushed it open, and descended into the darkness once more, feeling the weight of generations of suffering pressing down on me. I set up the cassette player on an old table and began playing the tapes one by one, listening to Ben's voice unraveling the horrifying history of the house. Each tape revealed more about the rituals and the terrible price Victor and his followers had paid for their lust for power. The final tape held a clue, a description of a ritual that could undo the binding spell and set the spirits free. It was dangerous and required a personal sacrifice, but it was the only way. Gathering the items I needed, a mirror, candles, and a piece of Ben's belongings, I prepared for the ritual. As I arranged the candles in a circle and placed the mirror in the center, the cellar grew colder, the air thick with anticipation. The shadows on the walls seemed to move with a life of their own, watching my every move. I lit the candles and began to chant the words I had memorized from the tape, my voice trembling with fear and determination. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers grew louder, merging into a cacophony of voices pleading for release. The shadows swirled around me, and I felt a presence pressing against my mind, testing my resolve. "You must be strong," Ben's voice echoed in my head. "You mustn't give in." I focused on the mirror, its surface reflecting the flickering candlelight, and continued the chant. Suddenly, the mirror's surface rippled, and a face appeared, Victor's twisted, malevolent visage. His eyes burned with anger and madness, and his mouth twisted into a snarl. "You cannot undo what has been done," he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "You will join them, just like your brother." The shadows closed in, and the temperature plummeted, but I refused to be intimidated. I pressed on, the words of the chant spilling from my lips with renewed fervor. As the ritual reached its climax, the shadows writhed in agony, and Victor's face contorted with rage. The mirror shattered, and a blinding light filled the cellar, driving back the darkness. The voices of the trapped souls rose in a harmonious chorus, their gratitude palpable. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air grew warmer, lighter. I slumped to the floor, exhausted but victorious. The shadows had retreated, and the whispers had ceased. I knew the spirits had been freed, and the curse lifted. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known since Ben's death. I had done it. I had finished what he had started, and in doing so, I had finally found closure. As I made my way back upstairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned to see a faint, ethereal figure standing in the hallway. It was Ben. He smiled at me, his eyes filled with pride and relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice a gentle breeze. "You've set us free." And with that, he faded into the light, leaving me with a sense of peace and closure I never thought I'd find. The house, now free from its dark past, felt different. The air was lighter, the oppressive weight lifted. I knew it was time to leave, to start anew. As I walked out the door and into the sunlight, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The shadows were gone, and the whispers had been silenced. The secrets of the past had been uncovered, and the spirits had found their peace. And so had I. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.